The golden string lights of Briarfield's summer festival flickered above the crowded dance floor. Mason Reed, a waiter in a wrinkled white shirt, extended his calloused hand toward a young woman who hadn't shown her face in public for 12 years. Lila Ashford. Half her face bore scars that twisted from temple to jaw. She was trembling. 30 feet away, her father, Grant Ashford, pushed through the crowd, ready to pull her away from this stranger. Then the music started. That song. His dead wife's song. Grant's feet stopped moving. On the dance floor, Lila stepped forward. Her scarred cheek caught the light. She didn't turn away. And for the first time in 12 years, she smiled. A smile that looked exactly like her mother's. Grant Ashford had built empires, but nothing prepared him for what that single dance was about to destroy. 3 days earlier, the town of Briarfield, Vermont was waking up to the smell of fresh lumber and the sound of hammers striking nails. Main Street had transformed overnight into a construction zone of joy. Volunteers stringing lights between lampposts, teenagers hauling folding tables from the community center, and old Mrs. Patterson directing traffic with the authority of a 4-star general. The Briarfield Harvest Festival happened once a year, and for 4 days, this sleepy town of 8,000 souls became the center of the universe for everyone who lived there. Banners announcing the 73rd annual celebration hung from every storefront, their edges flapping in the late August breeze. The air carried the promise of fried dough, live music, and the kind of simple happiness that money couldn't manufacture. Mason Reed wiped down the counter at Pine and Plate Diner, watching the chaos through the window with the detached interest of a man who had learned to observe life rather than participate in it. At 34, he moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had made peace with his circumstances, his hands, rough from years of carrying plates and scrubbing pots, worked automatically while his mind drifted elsewhere. The diner had been his anchor for 4 years now, ever since the night that split his life into before and after. Before, he had been a husband who danced with his wife in their tiny kitchen while their son giggled from his high chair. After, he became a widower who couldn't hear music without feeling his chest tighten. The transformation had been gradual, like watching color drain from a photograph until only gray remained. Carrie had loved to dance. She would grab his hands in the middle of cooking dinner, humming some half-remembered tune, and pull him into a clumsy waltz between the stove and the refrigerator. She had no sense of rhythm. Her feet moved to a beat that existed only in her head. But she never cared. Dancing isn't about the steps, she used to say. It's about the connection. Those words haunted Mason now. He remembered the way she would laugh when he stepped on her toes, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the way she made their cramped kitchen feel like a ballroom. Now the only dancing Mason did was the careful choreography of balancing plates on his forearm, weaving between tables, avoiding eye contact with customers who looked too happy. He had become a ghost in his own life, present, but not really there. The bell above the door chimed, and Mason looked up to see his son Noah burst through the entrance like a small hurricane. At 9 years old, Noah possessed the boundless energy that Mason remembered having once, back when the world seemed full of possibilities rather than memories. The boy's dark hair stuck up in 3 different directions, and his backpack hung off one shoulder, threatening to spill its contents across the floor. His eyes, bright and alive in a way that made Mason's heart ache with gratitude, scanned the diner until they landed on his father. There it was, that smile that could make even the darkest days bearable. Mason lived for that smile. Noah had survived the fire that took his mother. He carried a scar on his left shoulder, a patch of mottled skin that he rarely thought about anymore. But Mason thought about it every day. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything, and how the universe had decided to give him this one gift, a son who looked at the world with wonder instead of fear. Carrie had gone back into the burning house to save him. She had found Noah hiding in his closet, terrified of the smoke, and pushed him through the window to safety. She never made it out. Mason had been working the late shift at the restaurant, 20 minutes away. By the time he got home, there was nothing left but ash and sirens and a 5-year-old boy wrapped in a stranger's blanket. The guilt had nearly destroyed him. 4 years later, it still woke him at 3 a.m, whispering what-ifs into the darkness. Dad, did you see the Ferris wheel? They're setting it up right now in the square. And Mr. Henderson said the band this year is going to play until midnight, and there's going to be a pie-eating contest, and I already signed us up for the 3-legged race. Noah's words tumbled out in a breathless stream as he climbed onto a stool at the counter. Mason felt the familiar warmth spread through his chest, that mixture of love and grief that had become his constant companion. Noah was the reason he got up every morning, the reason he hadn't let himself sink into the darkness that beckoned in those first months after Carrie's death. The boy didn't know it, but he had saved his father's life simply by needing him. Mason ruffled his son's hair and slid a glass of chocolate milk across the counter. "Slow down, buddy. You're gonna run out of air." But he was smiling, the expression feeling almost natural on a face that had forgotten how to wear it. "The 3-legged race, huh? You remember what happened last year?" Noah's grin widened. "We almost won, if you hadn't tripped over that rock." "That rock came out of nowhere," Mason protested, and for a moment, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. These were the moments he lived for now, the small exchanges that reminded him that life continued, even when it felt like it shouldn't. The bell chimed again, and the atmosphere in the diner shifted like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Mason felt it before he saw it, that subtle change in energy that announced the arrival of someone who didn't belong. A man in a tailored suit walked through the door, his eyes scanning the establishment with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating a potential acquisition. Everything about him screamed money: the cut of his jacket, the gleam of his watch, the way he held himself as if the world owed him something. His face wore the permanent expression of mild disappointment that wealthy people often developed after years of getting everything they wanted and finding it wasn't enough. Behind him, almost hidden in his shadow, was a young woman. She moved differently than her companion, her shoulders curved inward, her gaze fixed on the floor as if it held answers she desperately needed. A curtain of dark hair fell across the left side of her face, and she clutched a silk scarf around her neck despite the summer heat. Her clothes were expensive, but chosen for concealment rather than style. Loose, dark, designed to make her disappear. She chose a booth in the far corner, positioning herself with her back to the room, arranging the salt and pepper shakers and the menu holder into a small barricade between herself and the world. Every movement spoke of practiced avoidance, of years spent learning how to take up as little space as possible. Mason approached their table with his notepad, his server's smile firmly in place. "Welcome to Pine and Plate. Can I start you folks off with something to drink?" The man barely glanced at him. "Coffee, black, and whatever passes for a salad in this establishment." His voice carried the impatience of someone accustomed to faster service and better options. Mason wrote it down without reaction. He had served enough tourists over the years to recognize the type, people who viewed small towns as quaint inconveniences rather than actual places where real people lived. "And for you, miss," he turned to the young woman, and for a brief moment, she looked up. Mason's breath caught in his throat. The left side of her face told a story of pain that he recognized instantly. Scar tissue stretched from her temple to her jaw, the skin pulled tight in patterns that spoke of fire and surgery and years of healing that would never quite be complete. The damage was significant, extensive enough that no amount of cosmetic work could fully hide it. But it wasn't the scars that stopped him. It was her eyes. They held the same hollow exhaustion he saw in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone who had learned to exist rather than live. He knew that look intimately. He wore it every day. "Just water, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She dropped her gaze immediately, retreating behind her curtain of hair, like a turtle withdrawing into its shell. Mason nodded and walked back to the counter, but something in him had shifted. He knew that posture. He had watched Noah sit exactly like that in the months after the fire, turning his scarred shoulder away from anyone who might see, flinching at every curious glance. The boy had grown out of it eventually, had learned that the people of Briarfield saw him as Noah, not as his injury. But this woman, whoever she was, hadn't had that chance. She was still hiding, still trapped in the moment of her trauma. Noah, oblivious to the tension, had already slid off his stool and was making his way toward the corner booth with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. Mason opened his mouth to call him back, but something stopped him. He watched as his son approached the table where the young woman sat alone, her father having stepped outside to take a phone call, his voice carrying through the window in sharp, commanding tones about acquisitions and valuations. Noah stopped beside her booth and simply stood there, waiting to be noticed with the patient confidence of a child who assumed everyone would want to talk to him. "Hi," he said, when she finally looked up. "I'm Noah. Are you here for the festival?" The young woman blinked, clearly unprepared for this small invasion of her carefully constructed solitude. Yes, I suppose we are." Her voice was uncertain, as if she had forgotten how to make conversation with anyone outside her carefully controlled world. Noah nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "It's really fun. There's going to be a Ferris wheel and cotton candy and a band that plays old songs. My dad says the songs are old anyway. I think they're pretty good." He paused, tilting his head with genuine curiosity. "What's your name?" Mason watched the exchange from behind the counter, ready to intervene if necessary. But the young woman's expression had changed. The defensive tension in her shoulders had softened slightly, and something that might have been curiosity flickered in her eyes, a brief spark in the darkness. Noah had that effect on people. He saw the world without the filters that adults developed, without the judgment and categorization that made people into types rather than individuals. To Noah, this woman wasn't a scar or a story or a tragedy. She was just someone new to talk to. "Lila," she said. "My name is Lila." The way she spoke her own name suggested she hadn't introduced herself to anyone in a very long time. Noah smiled, apparently satisfied with this information. "That's a nice name. You should come to the festival tomorrow night. I can show you the best games. I'm really good at the ring toss." He scratched absently at his arm, pushing up his sleeve without thinking. The motion revealed the scar on his shoulder, that familiar patch of damaged skin that had become as much a part of him as his dark hair and gap-toothed smile. Lila went still, her eyes fixed on Noah's shoulder, and for a moment, the mask she wore cracked completely. Mason saw it happen, that flicker of recognition, of connection, of suddenly finding someone who spoke your language. She wasn't looking at Noah with pity or curiosity, or the morbid fascination that strangers sometimes showed. She was looking at him as if she had just discovered she wasn't alone in the universe. "How did you?" She stopped herself, the question dying on her lips, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. But Noah understood. Children always understood the questions that adults were afraid to voice. "Fire," he said simply. "When I was 5, my mom saved me." There was no trauma in his voice, no seeking of sympathy. It was simply a fact of his life, as unremarkable to him as the color of his eyes. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Well, sometimes it itches when it's really hot outside. But mostly, I forget it's there." The door swung open, and the man in the suit strode back inside, his phone call evidently concluded. His eyes swept the room and landed on Noah standing beside his daughter's booth. His expression hardened into something cold and protective, like armor snapping into place. "Lila, we need to go." His tone left no room for discussion, no space for the connection that had been forming. Lila immediately began gathering her things, the brief openness in her face shuddering closed like a door slamming shut. But as she stood, she glanced at Noah one more time, and something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. "It was nice to meet you, Noah." Then she followed her father out the door, leaving behind only her untouched glass of water and a $20 bill on the table. Mason came to collect the payment, far too much for what they hadn't even ordered. Noah looked up at him with the earnest confusion of childhood. "Dad, why did she look so sad? Scars don't hurt forever, do they?" Mason crouched down to meet his son's eyes, struck as always by the simple wisdom that children carried. "No, buddy, they don't. But sometimes people forget that." That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Mason sat on the porch of their small house and watched the stars appear one by one. He thought about Carrie, about the way she had always believed the best in people. She would have marched right up to that young woman and invited her to dinner. Scars and rich father and all. Carrie had never understood the concept of strangers. Everyone was just a friend she hadn't made yet. Mason had loved that about her. He had also relied on it, using her warmth to compensate for his own reserve. Without her, he had become something less than himself. The first night of the Briarfield Harvest Festival arrived with a sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, as if the universe itself was celebrating. Main Street had been transformed into a wonderland of lights and colors, with food vendors lining both sides and the sound of a local jazz band drifting from the makeshift stage in the town square. Children ran between the game booths, their laughter mixing with the calls of barkers and the distant music of the carousel. The air was thick with the smell of fried dough, grilled corn, and the particular sweetness of cotton candy being spun into pink clouds. Mason had taken the evening off, a rare occurrence that Noah had celebrated by insisting they arrive early enough to secure prime position for the opening fireworks. They were standing near the ring toss booth when Noah spotted her. Lila Ashford stood at the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a lamppost, watching the festivities, with the longing of someone standing outside a window looking in. She was alone, her father nowhere in sight, and she clutched her silk scarf around her throat despite the warm evening air. Her posture was rigid, defensive, as if she expected at any moment to be told she didn't belong. "Lila!" Noah's voice carried across the noise, and before Mason could stop him, the boy had grabbed his hand and was dragging him toward her. "You came. I knew you would come." Lila's eyes widened as they approached, and for a moment, Mason thought she might flee. But something held her in place. Perhaps the genuine excitement in Noah's voice, or perhaps simply the exhaustion of constantly running. Yes. My father had a meeting with the town council about buying the old mill. I thought I might look around." Her words were hesitant, as if she was testing each one before letting it out. Noah was already tugging at her hand. "Come on, I'll show you the best stuff. The ring toss guy gives you extra throws if you make him laugh, and there's a lady who makes balloon animals that look like real animals, not just dogs and swords like at other fairs." He chattered on, oblivious to the way Lila was looking at him, with something approaching wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. Mason fell into step beside them, watching as his son did what he did best, see people for who they were rather than what they looked like. The evening unfolded with an ease that surprised Mason. Noah led them from booth to booth with the authority of a seasoned tour guide, explaining the merits of each game and the optimal strategy for winning prizes. He introduced Lila to Mrs. Patterson, who ran the pie booth and had known Mason since he was Noah's age, and to old Mr. Chen, who had been operating the ring toss for 40 years and still remembered everyone's name. And in each interaction, something remarkable happened. The people of Briarfield did what they had always done. They welcomed a stranger into their community without question or judgment. They didn't stare at Lila's scars or whisper behind their hands. They simply treated her as they would treat anyone else, with the automatic friendliness of people who had grown up knowing that community mattered more than appearances. Mason watched Lila's transformation in real time. The rigid tension in her shoulders began to soften. Her voice, initially a whisper, grew stronger as she responded to questions about where she was from and what she thought of the festival. She even laughed, a small sound, almost rusty from disuse, when Noah insisted she try the fried pickle and her face contorted at the unexpected taste. "That's certainly something," she managed, and Noah beamed as if she had just paid him the highest compliment. For a moment, watching them, Mason felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. They stopped at a picnic table to rest, and Mason found himself sitting across from Lila while Noah ran off to watch a magic show. The silence between them was surprisingly comfortable, filled with the ambient noise of the festival. "He's remarkable," Lila said finally, watching Noah disappear into the crowd. "Your son. He doesn't see it, does he? She gestured vaguely at her own face, unable to complete the sentence. Mason considered his response carefully. "He sees it. He just doesn't think it matters." He paused, weighing his next words. "He has his own scar. You probably noticed." Lila nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. "How did it happen, if you don't mind me asking?" The question opened a door that Mason had kept firmly shut for 4 years. But something about this moment, the festival lights, the distant music, the presence of someone who understood scars in a way most people never could, made him want to walk through it. "There was a fire at our house 4 years ago." His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the edge of the table. "My wife, Carrie. She got Noah out. She went back in for him when we couldn't find him at first. He was hiding in his closet, scared of the smoke. She found him, got him through the window." He stopped, the next words catching in his throat. "She didn't make it out." Lila was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with understanding that only came from shared experience. "I'm sorry." It wasn't the empty condolence that Mason had heard 1,000 times from well-meaning neighbors and distant relatives. It was the sorry of someone who knew what it meant to lose a piece of yourself to fire. "I wasn't there that night," Mason continued, surprising himself. He rarely talked about this, but the words seemed to flow of their own accord. "I was working. The late shift at a job I hated because we needed the money. 4 years later, I still ask myself what would have happened if I had been home, if I could have done something different, if I could have saved her." Lila's expression shifted, something raw flickering across her features. "My mother," she said quietly. 12 years ago. Car accident. The fuel tank." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "She pushed me out of the car before it exploded. I was 12. She didn't make it either." They sat together in the shared silence of people who had survived what shouldn't be survivable. Mason felt something shift in his chest, not the healing of a wound, but the recognition that he wasn't alone in carrying one. The if-onlys never stop, do they? Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "My father was driving that night. He walked away without a scratch, and I think he's been trying to protect me from everything ever since. He spent millions on surgeries, therapists, specialists. 3 operations on my face. 7 different psychologists. A penthouse where no one can see me. He built a whole world where I never have to face anyone or anything that might hurt me." She paused, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. "But he never realized that the cage he built to keep me safe was actually keeping me prisoner. The music shifted, and the band began playing a slower song. Couples drifted toward the dance area that had been set up in front of the stage, moving together in the easy rhythm of small-town romance. Lila watched them with an expression that made Mason's heart ache. Longing and fear and grief all tangled together. "My mother taught me to dance," she said softly. "In our living room. She used to sing while we danced, making up words when she forgot the lyrics. There was one song she loved more than any other, 'The Way You Look Tonight.' It was her wedding song with my father. She would sing it to me before bed, dancing me around my room until I was too tired to keep my eyes open." Her voice broke slightly. "After she died, my father couldn't bear to hear it. He banned it from the house. And I haven't danced since." Mason felt the weight of her confession settle over him like a familiar blanket. He understood that prohibition, that desperate attempt to control grief by eliminating its triggers. He had done the same thing after Carrie died, packed away her dancing shoes, avoided the kitchen where they used to waltz between the stove and refrigerator, changed the radio station whenever certain songs came on. But watching Lila's face as she watched the dancers, he wondered if avoidance was really protection or just another form of prison. "I used to dance with Carrie," he said quietly. "In our kitchen, every night while we cooked dinner. She was terrible at it, no sense of rhythm at all." He smiled at the memory, feeling it hurt in a way that had become familiar. But she didn't care. She said dancing wasn't about the steps. It was about the connection. He paused. "I haven't danced since she died. 4 years. Lila turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. Two people who had lost the ones they loved to fire, who had let their grief build walls around their hearts. The next 2 days passed in a blur of festival activities and small, meaningful moments. Lila returned each day, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was Noah's uncomplicated friendship, or the way the townspeople treated her as just another visitor, rather than a curiosity to be examined. Perhaps it was the conversations with Mason that stretched into the evening hours, two wounded souls finding comfort in shared understanding. Grant Ashford remained largely absent, consumed by negotiations with the town council about acquiring the old textile mill. When he did appear, his interactions with Lila were brief and businesslike, as if she were an employee rather than his daughter. Mason watched these exchanges with growing understanding. Grant wasn't a villain. He was a man who had dealt with his grief by trying to control everything around him, including the daughter who reminded him of everything he had lost. On the third night of the festival, the main event arrived. The grand dance in the town square. The stage had been expanded, a real dance floor laid down over the cobblestones, and the band had been practicing all week for this moment. Mason stood at the edge of the crowd with Noah, watching the dancers take the floor. He had told himself he was just here for his son, that he had no intention of participating. But his eyes kept drifting to where Lila stood alone near the bandstand, her face a mixture of longing and fear. Noah noticed too. "Dad," he said, tugging at Mason's sleeve. Lila looked sad again. Mason nodded, unsure what to say. Then Noah's face brightened with the particular light of a child who had just had an idea. "I'll be right back." Before Mason could stop him, the boy had darted through the crowd and disappeared toward the stage where the band was setting up for their next song. Minutes passed. Mason watched Lila, watched the way she swayed almost imperceptibly to the music, watched the way her hand drifted up to touch her scarred cheek whenever someone walked too close. He thought about Carrie, about all the dances they had shared, and all the ones they would never have. The band finished their song, and the lead singer leaned into the microphone. All right, folks, we've got a special request next. This one comes from a young man named Noah, and it's dedicated to, quote, my friend, Lila. Mason's heart stopped. He knew what was coming before the first notes even played, and from the way Lila's face went pale, so did she. The Way You Look Tonight floated across the square, its melody both beautiful and devastating. Mason saw Lila stiffen, saw her eyes fill with tears as the song her mother used to sing wrapped around her like a ghost's embrace. Across the square, Grant Ashford had emerged from the town hall where he had been meeting with the council. He stood frozen, his face a mask of shock as the forbidden song filled the air. For a moment, the three of them were suspended in the music, Lila drowning in memory, Grant confronted with a grief he had tried to bury, and Mason watching from the sidelines as he had watched his whole life since Carrie died. Then Mason moved. He didn't think about it, didn't analyze it, didn't let himself second guess. He simply walked across the square to where Lila stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. I think your mother would want to see you dance, he said softly. Lila looked at him with wild eyes. I can't. Everyone will see. Everyone will. They'll see a woman who deserves to be happy, Mason interrupted gently. That's all they'll see. That's all that matters. He extended his hand, his calloused, working man's hand, and waited. I haven't danced since Carrie died, he added quietly. 4 years. But I think it's time. For both of us. Lila's gaze dropped to his hand, then rose to his face. The song continued to play, its familiar melody filling the spaces between them. My hands are shaking, she whispered. So are mine, Mason admitted, and he smiled. A real smile. The kind he had almost forgotten how to make. Lila reached out, her fingers touched his palm, and together they stepped onto the dance floor. At first they were awkward, two people who had forgotten how to move with another person. Mason led her to the edge of the floor, away from the center where the lights were brightest, giving her a place to feel safe. But as the music continued, something shifted. Lila's rigid posture began to soften. Her steps, initially hesitant, found the rhythm, and Mason felt something unlock in his chest, a door that had been closed for 4 years, finally swinging open. Halfway through the song, Lila lifted her head. Her scarred cheek caught the light from the string of golden bulbs overhead, and for the first time, she didn't turn away. She let herself be seen. Mason spun her gently, and she followed his lead, her movements becoming more fluid, more free. The people around them had stopped to watch, but there was no malice in their gazes, only the soft appreciation of people witnessing something beautiful. Dad's dancing. Noah's voice cut through the crowd, high and excited. Dad's dancing again. The words hit Mason like a wave. Again, his son remembered. The song approached its final notes, and Mason made a decision. Instead of fading into the background, he led Lila in one final spin, a full turn that brought her into the center of the dance floor, directly under the brightest lights. Her scarred face was fully visible, illuminated for everyone to see, and she didn't hide. She didn't run. She simply stood there, breathing hard, tears on her cheeks, looking more alive than she had in 12 years. The crowd erupted in applause, not polite, obligatory clapping, but real, heartfelt appreciation. Mrs. Patterson was wiping her eyes with her apron. Old Mr. Chen was clapping so hard, his ring-toss prizes were shaking. Grant Ashford watched from 30 feet away, his feet rooted to the cobblestones. The song, her song, the song he had forbidden anyone to play, echoed in his ears. He watched his daughter laugh. Laugh. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard that sound. He had spent 12 years and millions of dollars trying to fix what the fire had broken, and none of it, not the surgeons, not the therapists, not the soundproof walls, had done what 3 days in this insignificant small town had accomplished. A waiter. A waiter in a wrinkled shirt with calloused hands had given his daughter something that all of Grant's money couldn't buy. The realization hit him like a physical blow, cracking open the careful architecture of control he had built around his heart. He hadn't protected his daughter. He had imprisoned her. And the prison wasn't the penthouse or the private tutors. The prison was him. After the dance ended, Grant found himself walking not toward his daughter, but away from the crowd. He needed air, needed space to process the earthquake that had just demolished everything he believed. He ended up on a bench at the edge of the square, his head in his hands, the sounds of celebration continuing behind him. "Mind if I sit?" Mason Reed appeared beside the bench, his presence a quiet intrusion. Grant wanted to refuse, wanted to send this man away with a cutting remark about knowing his place, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, too exhausted to maintain his defenses. They sat in silence for a moment, two fathers watching the festival from the outside. "She's beautiful when she smiles," Mason said finally. Grant felt his throat tighten. "I haven't seen her smile like that in 12 years, not since before the accident." His voice was rough, unfamiliar to his own ears. "I was driving that night," Grant said suddenly, the confession tearing out of him. "The accident. I walked away without a scratch. My wife died. My daughter's face was... and I just walked away." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Everyone told me it wasn't my fault. But every time I look at Lila's face, I see evidence of my failure. I see my wife dying while I survived. I see everything I couldn't prevent." He turned to look at Mason. "So I tried to prevent everything else. I thought if I could just control enough, I could keep her safe. But all I did was keep her prisoner." Mason absorbed this confession in silence. When he finally responded, his voice was thoughtful, measured. "I wasn't there the night of the fire. I was working. My wife went back into the burning house to save our son. She didn't get out herself, and for years I tortured myself with the same question you're asking. Why did I survive? What right do I have to be here when she's not?" He paused. Noah was the one who finally helped me understand. He told me once that being sad forever wasn't going to bring his mom back. He said the best way to honor her was to live the life she wanted for us. Mason's voice softened. "I'm still learning how to do that. But I think the first step is accepting that survival isn't betrayal. It's just what happened, and what we do with our survival. That's what matters." For the first time in 12 years, Grant felt real tears on his face. His shoulders began to shake, and he covered his face with his hands. Mason didn't mock him, didn't look away. He simply sat there, a witness to the breaking of a man who had held himself together for far too long. A hand touched Grant's shoulder. He looked up to find Lila standing before him, her eyes wet, but her expression somehow peaceful. "Dad," she said softly. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and took his hand. Grant pulled her into an embrace, holding his daughter as if she might disappear. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I didn't know how to help you. I thought if I could just control enough, if I could just protect you from everything." Lila pulled back to look at him, her scarred face wet with tears. "I know, Dad. I know." They stood together as the festival continued around them, two people finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in 12 years. 1 year later, the Briarfield Harvest Festival returned. The same golden lights, the same booths, the same band. But some things had changed. The old textile mill had been transformed into a community center, the Ashford Foundation. Inside, programs ran daily, support groups for burn survivors, counseling for those who had lost loved ones, workshops on rebuilding life after trauma, Grant had funded the entire renovation, but more importantly, he had funded it without strings, without control. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, giving away his money and walking away, trusting others to know what the community needed. Lila ran the center's programs now, her hair pulled back, her scars visible for anyone who cared to look. She had moved to Briarfield, trading luxury for community, isolation for connection. Mason still worked at the diner, but on Saturday evenings, he taught dance classes at the community center. Free of charge, all ages welcome. He called it Carrie's class. Noah, now 10, had become the official dance enforcer. Anyone who didn't dance had to buy him cotton candy. As evening fell, the band announced the song that had become a Briarfield tradition, "The Way You Look Tonight." Lila stepped forward, but she didn't wait for anyone to lead her. She walked to the center of the floor alone, then extended her hand to a young woman with burn scars on her arms, a participant in the center's programs who had never danced in public. "Come on," Lila said. "I'll show you how." Grant watched, tears streaming down his face, not tears of guilt, tears of pride. Mason appeared beside him. "You know, I used to think losing Carrie was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But that loss led me here, to this town, to that diner. It led me to being in the right place when your daughter needed to see that scars don't have to mean hiding. Maybe that's how we honor the people we've lost. By letting their absence make room for new connections." Noah tugged at Mason's sleeve. "Dad, do you think Mom can see us?" Mason knelt to meet his son's eyes. "I think she can, buddy. I think she's smiling that big smile of hers." Noah nodded. "Good. I want her to know we're okay." The song swelled, filling the square with a melody that no longer meant grief. It meant hope. It meant connection. It meant the courage to step into the light and let yourself be seen. Mason took Noah's hand and stepped onto the dance floor. Grant followed, tapping Lila's shoulder. "May I have this dance?" Lila's eyes widened. "I thought you didn't dance." Grant smiled. "I'm learning." Father and daughter began to move, awkward, but laughing. The song faded, and the square erupted in applause, for the courage to step into the light, for the vulnerability of letting others see your scars, for the simple act of choosing joy over fear. The Way You Look Tonight wasn't a song about perfection. It was a reminder that the most beautiful things in life aren't flawless. They're simply loved.